Hey guys, it's Will. Welcome back to the channel. I hope you are doing well. If you are new here, welcome and thank you for finding us. I hope you enjoyed this video. Today we're going to be talking about Oliver Stone and the film Born on the 4th of July, which came out in 1989. It stars Tom Cruise and it was written by Oliver Stone and Ron Kovic. Ron Kovic is the guy who the film is about. So it tells his story. He grew up in Long Island, and he was like just a guy from a normal American family at that time, baseball and the Yankees, and be patriotic and inspired by JFK's speech about, doing more for your country. And he joined the military. He went into Vietnam. And it was a horrible experience for him. I'm not going to spoil the movie for you, but they kind of suffice it to say he was paralyzed. And so he spent the rest of his life in a wheelchair. And so the film tells his true story and is based on a book that he wrote about his experience. So I read Oliver Stone's book recently. I'm going to be referencing this. We're going to be reading a quote from it. You can see I got my little post-it note in there. So this is called Chasing the Light. This is Oliver Stone's book. This book is freaking incredible. It covers his life, basically, not just his career, but his whole life up until Platoon came out, won a bunch of Oscars. He was working on Wall Street at the time. It doesn't talk about the production of Wall Street, but he does talk about the writing of Wall Street a little bit. I'm a huge Oliver Stone fan, worth pointing out. When I was in high school and I got really into movies and started being like more serious about like, I'm going to study directors and like this kind of stuff, I would go to my local video store and they had sections for directors, and I would go through, like I did Scorsese, Kubrick, like I would go through them. And Oliver Stone was the first one who really stood out to me as like me really loving all of his work. Like there were Scorsese films that blew my mind. There were Kubrick films that blew my mind. But when I went through like Platoon, Wall Street, Born on the 4th of July, I mean, Any Given Sunday was out at that point, Natural Born Killers, JFK, like I loved all of those movies. Like Oliver Stone blew my mind. And having read that book recently, and I'm rewatching a bunch of his movies, they're still incredible. And he's an amazing writer. Like he wrote Scarface, he wrote Midnight Express, and he's an incredible director. And I think he's kind of like really underrated in this interesting way, in that he was hugely successful at the height of his career, but his career doesn't seem to have, or his work maybe is a better way to put it, doesn't seem to have endured in the way that the work of some of his peers have, like Brian De Palma, Michael Mann. Like those are people that, young people are still like really actively watching their films, talking about them on Twitter, Letterboxd, like that kind of stuff. I don't see as much of that with Oliver Stone, but maybe we'll have a renaissance, I don't know, of appreciation for Oliver Stone. But when after I read that book, and like I said, I've been rewatching his films. I rewatched Born on the 4th of July, and I was looking at some stuff on Wikipedia about the movie, and they always do like the critical reception, whatever section of Wikipedia, and there were a couple things in there that were interesting to me, in that they sparked thoughts about my perspective on film criticism, film reviewers, and certain things they do that I find to be, that I don't quite understand. It's the best way to put it. So I'm gonna read you two little excerpts from two different reviews of this film, and then I just want to talk a little bit about my thoughts and reaction to those. So some people loved this movie, some people really didn't love this movie, and that's fair, and that happens a lot with films like that. Oliver Stone can be a very divisive filmmaker, which I completely understand. I'm not saying that you have to like Oliver Stone, because I do. This is just kind of my perspective. So let me find these two. So Owen Gleiberman of Entertainment Weekly. Now, when I did the reaction video to the top 50 action movies from Variety, Owen Gleiberman was one of the people who put that list together, and I talked in that video about how I've been reading his reviews for like 25 years. Like since I was in high school, I worked at a library in high school. We had a magazine room at the library. And when magazines would come off of the, this week shelf or this month issue or whatever, and I would go and organize them and catalog them in that room. And so Entertainment Weekly was something we got every week, and I always read the movie reviews in there. So I've been reading his reviews for like 20-something years, and his work has been very influential and important to me over the years. So I'm not trying to insult him as a human being or say I have any problem with him, but this quote stood out to me. He called the film 2.5 hours of self-righteousness masquerading as art. And then Pauline Kael of The New Yorker. So Pauline Kael is famous for being kind of nasty and prickly and condescending and like, and she hated Oliver Stone's work, as he actually includes a lot of excerpts from her reviews in this book. There were a couple of movies of his where she kind of acquiesced and was like, okay, fine, I get it. But like she hated. And it's like, in a way you can understand. I don't know anything about Pauline Kael's life, but if she's like this upper middle class, well-educated, like, very well cultured, like New Yorker film reviewer, from this kind of very like classic American liberal background, right? And then you have Oliver Stone, who was in the Vietnam War, who, as he writes in his book, what like saw people murdered by friendly fire. He was seriously injured by shrapnel. He saw like villages burned down. He saw soldiers beating civilians, civilians slaughtered, raped, babies killed. Like he himself was pushed so far once he considered shooting a civilian but didn't do it. But like that level of dehumanization and brutality and violence, he sees the world in a very different way than someone who's sheltered and protected from things like that, right? So you can see how when he writes a film like Scarface, that's just his like very honest look at America and what he sees as the American dream and the American thirst for like violence, drugs, money, sex, especially in the 80s. You can see how someone who has a more romantic view of things or whatever would bristle at that, right? So you can understand why they're kind of like oil and water, excuse me, in a way. This is what she said about this film. It's almost inconceivable that Ron Kovic, so that's the guy who co-wrote the screenplay and whose story this film is, was as innocent as the movie and the 1976 autobiography on which it is based make him out to be. Kovic's book is simple and explicit. He states his case in plain, angry words. Stone's movie yells at you for 2 hours and 25 minutes. So I'm going to talk about the Owen Gleiberman quote first, and then I'll talk about Pauline Kael. So Owen Gleiberman says, 2.5 hours of self-righteousness masquerading as art. What strikes me as really interesting about this quote is that Ron Kovic obviously was in the Vietnam War because it's his story, and the movie is about a Vietnam veteran who is paralyzed and comes home and is in a wheelchair and is trying to reconcile with that and becomes an anti-war protester and movement leader and stuff like that. Oliver Stone very famously won freaking Oscars for Platoon, which is based on his personal experience in Vietnam, was in the Vietnam War. So it brings up an interesting point to me because when you say self-righteousness masquerading as art, that's a judgment on something. It's not you looking at it and saying, well, it does this well. It doesn't do that well. I don't like this part of it. I do like this part of it, whatever, right? And I should say I haven't read the whole review, but I'm just kind of talking about this quote. And again, I'm not trying to insult Owen Gleiberman or say he's wrong or whatever. It just sparked a thought in me, which is if art is subjective and the purpose of art is to allow artists with unique talents, with unique perspectives, with a unique voice to express their perspective and opinion and experience, right? If the best art is truly art that only one person could make, that could only come from the minds of the people from whom it came. Oliver Stone, Ron Kovic, Tom Cruise plays the lead in this movie. Like that performance could only have come from Tom Cruise, like things of that nature, right? Does a critic have, what license must you give yourself as a critic? What is your perspective when you look at a work of art about Vietnam and the post-Vietnam experience created by two people who lived that? When I don't know if Owen Gleiberman was in Vietnam, but I really doubt it. Do you have license to say that their art is wrong, that it's self-righteous, that it's not meaningful, that it's masquerading as art, that it's just a self-righteous tirade? Like, so I guess, there's two questions at the core of this. The first question is, does someone have the right to say that at all? And again, yeah, I know that everyone has the right to say everything. Ultimately, you have to live with the consequences of having said that. But realistically speaking, I've never been to war. So can I watch a movie about war made by a soldier and be like, it's self-righteous? Like, do I have the right to say that morally? Number two, what was my second point? My first point was, number two, where does a critic give themselves the license? Like, why, as a critic, is your thought not to try to understand their perspective and why they made the movie the way they made it? And I mean, would it not be wrong to assume that they have the right and the license and the permission, whatever, to be self-righteous? That they've been through this experience, that they've been ignored, that they've been, like Oliver Stone talks about, like, people finding out he was in Vietnam and like treating him differently afterwards. And like, have they not earned the right to be like, even if the film is self-righteous, which I don't think it is, but even if it is, haven't they earned that? So where does the license come from the critic to say this is self-righteous? given the fact that it's based on their personal experience. It's just an interesting thing to think about. So now I want to talk about the Pauline Kael quote. And again, she hated Oliver Stone. So take this with a grain of salt. It's almost inconceivable. I mean, so I'm going to break this down into the two halves. It's almost inconceivable that Ron Kovic was as innocent as the movie and the 1976 autobiography on which it's based make him out to be. How the hell would you know? Has she ever met Ron Kovic? She most certainly did not know him when he was growing up, when he was in his innocent phase, before he was disillusioned by the war and stuff like that. Like, just because you don't believe it doesn't mean it's true. And it's not your job as a film critic to doubt someone's own perspective on their own personality and the way they've changed over time. Like, that's such a self-righteous, presumptuous position to take that it's almost like, how do you not have a self-conscious mechanism in your brain that makes you think, oh, maybe I shouldn't say this because I don't know this person. I've never met them. I've never spent any time with them. I don't know who they really are. I don't know if they're trying to make a point by writing a character who maybe was more innocent than the real person was, or maybe wasn't. How do you know? Like, I'm going to get at a deeper point that I think that the Pauline Kael quote as a whole brings up. But let me read the second half of it. Kovic's book is simple and explicit, and he states his case in plain, angry words. So this is what I want to talk about, this next bit. Stone's movie yells at you for 2 hours and 25 minutes. So she's saying that the movie is bad because of the pitch, the pace, and the attitude of the film. Now, this is where I want to get into Oliver Stone's book. I'm going to read you something from Oliver Stone's book from when he and Ron Kovic were writing the script. They originally wrote the script for this movie in the early 80s or late 70s. It was very early in his career. I'm trying to see if the exact date is in here somewhere. I think it was after Midnight Express. Which came out in what, 78, 79? So it was like maybe late 70s, 1980, that they were writing the screenplay. It took forever to get the movie made. Same is true with Platoon. So let's see here. So this is Oliver Stone is talking in the book about how he felt that Kovic's telling of his own story and the script that they were working on and the way that Kovic insisted that the script had to be written, Oliver Stone felt it was a little bit over the top. So this is what Oliver Stone says. One couldn't make everything in a movie hyper. Proportion was necessary. But what else could Ron be? He'd been driven crazy by this wound to his spine, half dead for the rest of his life. So Oliver Stone felt the movie was an insane pitch, like she's saying, yelling at you for 2.5 hours. But once you understand the character, once you meet the guy, Oliver Stone understands the movie. And he makes the movie as he feels it must be made based on the experiences of Ron Kovic. So this is what we get into here, which is the notion of intent, right? So I'm trying to think of a good way to explain. Here's a good little anecdote from my life that I think helps explain the notion of intent in art. For a little while, I was a security guard, if you could believe that, at an art museum because my undergrad degree was in art history. So they had me work as a security guard because then the people asked questions, like I might be able to help answer questions, but I could also say to people, please don't touch the painting and that kind of stuff, right? So we had this portrait in the gallery where I was working one day that was by one of the Italian futurists. I don't remember which artist it was, but it was a portrait that was kind of influenced by photography, right? Because it was from the early 20th century. And it was a portrait of a guy from like the torso up, but the half of his arm was not in the painting, right? They had cut the painting had been framed so that part of his arm was missing, like it was taken like an accidental photograph where you missed part of the image, right? So while I was working there one day, a student came up to me, an art history student, and he had been assigned to write a paper about this particular painting. And he came over to me and he's like, the guy, half the guy's arm is missing. Like, was that done on purpose, or did the canvas get cut or whatever, right? So yeah, it was done on purpose, right? So intent is, what is the artist doing? Why are they showing you what they're showing you, and what are they trying to say with it, right? Why did they make this? What is their goal? What is their perspective? And why does it exist in the way in which it exists? I find very much with film criticism, like this Pauline Kael quote, that you have critics who will watch a movie, be upset that it's not the movie they want to be seeing, and then dismiss it as bad because it doesn't fit their subjective taste or their perspective of what a movie should be. Critics are not artists, right? This is not an insult. This is just a fact, right? Interestingly enough, I very often find that film reviews that bristle me, that kind of annoy me a little bit, are film reviews in which people state an observation as though it is a criticism or a judgment or an analysis of a film, right? So like an obvious example of this that I can remember is when Sicario 2 came out, and there was this review that was like, this movie is really cynical. And that was supposed to be a criticism. And it's like, that's an observation. Yeah, it's a really cynical movie. Like, go beyond that. I feel like critics, they make an observation and they hit a wall. And they're like, this is the end of my engagement with this film. Pauline Kael, I feel like I'm being yelled at for 2.5 hours. Boom. I don't want this to be the movie I'm watching. I want a different tone. I want a different pace. I want different acting. I don't like this. Instead of thinking, okay, this is not what I thought it was going to be. It's not maybe necessarily what appeals to my subjective taste. But why is it the way it is? Oliver Stone does not accidentally make a movie, right? Especially in 1989, he's made Salvador, Platoon, Wall Street, and Salvador was his 3rd movie. So this was his 6th film, if I'm counting correctly. Plus, he wrote Scarface, was on the set of Scarface the whole time they were making it. Midnight Express wrote that film. Like, this is a guy who'd been working in the industry for a decade at this point, at the highest levels, won multiple Oscars. He doesn't make a movie by accident, right? So why did he make the movie the way he made it? This is what I don't understand about film critics, is why do they hit that wall where they think, this is not what I want, this is not what I think it should be, ergo it is wrong, instead of thinking, why is it the way it is? And that quote just made me, it kind of stimulated that thought, where I see that a lot with movie reviews, where I think, you're dismissing a film unfairly by not trying to understand the intent behind it. Now, obviously, there are films that are made with no intent, or that the intent is to make money, or to churn out some piece of crap as quickly as possible to like hit some zeitgeist moment, or because the IP is owned by someone and they think they can make money off of it, or because, you know, some rich person has decided that a biopic needs to be made about them and they want to get behind it. You know, like, there are a lot of reasons films are made, but a film like this, with a filmmaker like Oliver Stone, gets made with intent. It gets made deliberately, and there's a reason it is the way it is. So it's interesting to me that film critics, whose job it is to just watch movies and think about them, don't really think about them that much. They watch them, they immediately react to them, they write their immediate, it's almost like a child, right? Like, there's no real critical thought that goes into it, despite the fact that they are critics. And I think part of that is they go through school, and their professors tell them, oh, you're great, like, that's a great opinion, whatever, and they give them a degree, and they feel as though, you know, authority has been bestowed upon them by a respected institution, and then they get a job, and they think of their employer as an institution. Like, Owen Gleiberman's running for Entertainment Weekly. It's this huge force in the industry, this big entertainment magazine. He has whatever degree, he has whatever experience as a critic. Authority has been bestowed upon him, and so that therefore he can watch a movie, you know, have his thoughts right away. And again, I'm not trying to insult him at all. Everyone's entitled to their opinion and stuff like that. I'm trying to understand the mind of the critic, right? Or like with Pauline Kael, she gets educated, she goes to school, she starts writing reviews, and she feels as though, you know, and she had a very devoted following, right? So that allows her to feel as though she's correct in some way, that what she's doing has meaning. Instead of stopping for a minute and really trying to understand the movie, instead of just saying it doesn't meet whatever subjective criteria I have, ergo it has no value as art. So that's just a quick video. It's not quick at this point, but it's a little video I'm making based on just having read Chasing the Light, Oliver Stone's autobiography here, and then rewatching Born on the 4th of July, reading some criticism of it. So my name is Will, and I thank you for watching the channel. I hope you liked this video, and we'll see you next time.